Far north from the serene southern cities of the Empire, icy winds blow through the frozen tundra in the barren lands of Kislev like a cold breath. Dry steppes, sweeping plains, rocky mountains, and frozen rivers, all breathing life into an unforgiving land. Nonetheless, even in one of the most inhospitable places of the Warhammer world, the Kislevites found the will and dedication to stay, making Kislev the northernmost human civilization. Kislev guards the borderlands of the north against the terrible servants of chaos. Each year, the northern border is harder to defend, and each year, the toll of death is greater. But to the Kislevites, this is a price they are willing to pay. The north is their homeland, and if they cannot live there, they will die there. This video is sponsored by The Siege, a science fiction and fantasy fandom forum dedicated to the civil exchange of ideas, opinions, creative writing, and artwork. The site has lots of Warhammer-related content in the form of fan fiction, short stories, discussions, artworks, and gaming on tabletop, as well as video game-related content revolving around Warhammer and other universes. It is a fan site for anyone who enjoys sharing their passion with a wider community who enjoy these topics. The forum is open, and if you'd like to join in on the conversation and be part of a thriving community, check out the link in the description below. The Kingdom of Kislev is ruled by a Tsar or Tsarina from the capital city of Kislev. The current ruler is the legendary Ice Queen, Katarin, a powerful wizard and master of ice magic. Many of her subjects firmly believe that their majesty is a reincarnation of the first Khan Queen Miska, the founder of their homeland. Kislev has borders with the Empire of Men to the south and west, an alliance which has not always known peace, yet they have always stood up for one another in times of need, fighting together as united forces against the hordes of chaos for the survival of humankind. The ragged rims of the World's Edge Mountains rise to the east, hoarding orcs and goblins that threaten both the Kislevites and the dwarves of the mountains. To the northwest lies the cold and lonely meadows called the Troll Country. The winds of magic blow heavily there, enhancing the numbers of the abominable creatures that roam the dangerous tundra. The western coast of Kislev is washed by the Sea of Claws. The inhabitants of the coast are never rid of the constant sieges of the savage Norse raiders who sail across the wild waves in search for treasure and lands to plunder in the name of their dark gods. To live and to survive in Kislev is not an easy burden to carry by any. Even the most stubborn warriors of the summer countries would be broken in these bitter and harsh lands, if not by the ceaseless attacks and sieges by the Chaos Hordes, then by the land itself. Fortunately for the Empire of Men in the south, the people of Kislev are as wild and stubborn as the desolated lands they have made their home. For they are the sole barrier holding back the ever-growing evil creeping from the north. Even before the very birth of Kislev, the ancestors of the Kislevites, the Gospodar clans, were no stranger to a harsh life in the far eastern steppes. In the past, these proud people prospered in the open plains where Gospodars rode their horses, shared drinks, and exchanged blows with their neighboring clans of Hungs and Kurgan nations, like the powerful Dolgans and mammoth-herding Cossacks. Like the Gospodars, Kurgans were the descendants of the ancient Scythian people, nomadic barbarians who ruled the steppes in the times of old. However, once the Chaos Gods began to send tenacious foes to their homeland, The Gospodars left the eastern steppes, following much bloodshed. The will of their cousins, however, the hardy clans of Kurgans, were eventually bent by the darkness of chaos. Thrown from their peaceful homes, they followed a shaman priestess called Miska, who had promised a new homeland for her people in the west. The Gospodars rode their horses into the unknown frozen lands beyond the World's Edge Mountains to meet their destiny. When the Ice Queen and her people arrived in the lands now known as Kislev, they found it already populated by the ancient tribe of Ungols. Although brave and stubborn themselves, the Ungols could not resist the giant horde of Gospodar riders and the crushing powers of their queen, who was able to muster the power of winter itself. Their cities fell one by one, and the Ungols were exiled further and further north. Fierce, brave, and capable, their queen was then called Miska the Slaughterer. After years of ferocious resistance, the surviving Ungols accepted the rule of the Gospodars. They were eventually assimilated into the new society, mixing their blood with Gospodars and forming the modern Kislevites. Following the conquest and the foundation of Kislev, any damaged cities and settlements were rebuilt and repaired by the Kislevites. For 750 long years, they flourished despite the occasional attack from the Roman Chaos hordes, greenskins, and other threats. Forts were established and garrisoned with hundreds of valiant soldiers. These were lights that lit up against the insidious darkness of chaos, slowly creeping from the north and into the lands of men. These forts were led by a March Boyar, to watch for any sign of upcoming threats.
You look down on us and think we are little better than barbarians. But you should be glad we are, for without us here, the northern tribes would be dining in your burning homes. Look down on us. You should get on your knees and thank us every day.
Kislevites are great warriors and magnificent horsemen. They tirelessly patrol the northern border along the Troll country, trying to keep the rampaging warbands in check. However, everything changed when the dark forces of the Chaos Gods grew stronger and finally invaded Kislev in a tide of destruction, resulting in a great devastation of the lands and a bloody conflict that would span between the years 2301 to 2304 IC. Before the war started, shamans and wise individuals from all over the lands saw the damned omens and foretold of what was about to dawn on the kingdoms of men, planting the seeds of fear and making all mortal beings uneasy. Across the Empire, terrible nightmares were common. Wells were filled with blood. Pigs stood on their hind legs and screamed in human voices, leaving people bewildered and restless. The winds blew even colder and drier in Kislev. Their forts were faced with brutal raids like never before, and the horrifying prophecies were foretold about the dark gods getting stronger in the Chaos Wastelands. Finally, a forceful storm came down from the north, determined to sweep away all that stood in its path. The Chaos Champion, Asavar Kull, bonded the forces of rival dark gods together and commanded a massive army of destruction that poured down on the mortal beings of Kislev and the Empire. Damned creatures from the northern wastelands marched south, along with innumerable barbarian tribes. All sorts of mutant creatures and demons of chaos crawled out of the menacing shadows. The beastmen also answered the call of the dark voice and came out of their hideouts deep in the woods, while many hidden chaos cults all across the Empire instigated uprisings to weaken any response from the Empire and Kislev to the war effort. With the defense experience Kislevites gained through generations in the battlefield, They swiftly formed a counterforce to march against the army of the ever-chosen Asavar Kul. Neighboring Ostlanders were honorable and sturdy folk themselves, and so they joined the army of Kislev rapidly when they received the call for help from their northern neighbors. Together, they marched north to meet the Chaos Warriors. The ground shook with the steps, horns, and drums of both armies, and the two forces clashed on the snowy plains of the Northlands. The honorable Griffin Legion of Kislev managed to clear one flank of the enemy. However, the fragile hope that some dared to keep alive vanished at once when the massive dragon ogre Shagaths appeared and smashed the fighters of the Legion. The combined armies of men were vicious, and they fought with an otherworldly strength, yet the enemy was otherworldly itself. Underestimating the vast numbers and the powerful mutations of their enemies, the valiant defenders fell to the ground. The snow turned red, and the frozen earth of the Northlands was once again awash with blood that flowed from the piles of lifeless bodies that once belonged to some of the best warriors of humankind. The surviving few rode back south and guarded the bridges, believing the forces of chaos could not pass the raging waters of River Linsk on their march to Kislev. Apart from being an important source of trade for the kingdom of Kislev, the river is a natural barrier that helps keep the warbands of chaos at bay. The bridges were much easier to protect against such large forces, and they would hold against the dark tide as they had in times past. Unfortunately, they were mistaken. The empowered chaos sorcerers unleashed their foul magic and turned the flowing waters of river into blood that froze over before the eyes of the startled Kislevite defenders. They were all slaughtered without mercy, and with them, the only chance of survival for their homeland seemed to be gone. By crossing the river, the Chaos Horde entered the civilized lands of Kislev, ready to burn it all to the ground. Realizing how dire their situation was, the Tsar of Kislev warned the Elector Counts and asked for aid while the Chaos forces marched further in the direction of the capital, laying siege to the city of Erengrad and surrounding the city of Prague. At that time, the empire itself was torn apart from the inside without a central ruling. None of the electors trusted one another, and their rivalries dragged the empire further into disarray. With no sight of leadership, provinces were drawn into deeper desperation, following the sudden rise of chaos cults within their land and their weakened armies, the rampant disease and the increasing chaotic mutations appearing across many provinces. There was yet one man, Magnus von Bildhofen of Nuln, who had the courage and faith in the strength of the united lands of the Empire, and sallied forth to unite the armies of men against the Chaos Hordes. Magnus traveled from settlement to settlement, rallying and inspiring the people against the growing Chaos menace. He traveled from city to city gaining support, and soon after, his charm and leadership made him a beloved leader to the common folk. By this time, the age of the three emperors had worn out the empire for a long time. Year after year, common folk bled for the power-thirsty three emperors and their will to rule. It was a shattered land Magnus tried to mend together, the broken pieces of a once glorious empire. As hard as his task seemed to be, thousands gathered behind him, believing that he was the one who could finally bring together a divided empire. Eventually, the armies of the many Elector Counts joined him as well, either believing in his strengths in the great war to come, or out of fear from rebellion or disapproval from the common folk. Before heading north, Magnus succeeded in recruiting powerful and influential allies. R. Ulrich Kravstov of Mittelheim, and Teclis, High Lore Master of Holith, and one of the mightiest sorcerers in the entire world. When Magnus finally marched north, answering the call from Kislev, he had the largest army the Empire had seen in centuries rallied behind him. In the hopes of sending their aid to Prague in time, Magnus ordered his speedy cavalry forces to ride ahead, under the command of Kravstov, while the rest of the army followed behind. Yet, even the fastest of them could not have reached the city in time to turn the tides. By the time the mounted Imperial forces arrived and could see Prague in the distance, smoke and ash were rising to the skies, and the smell of death filled the air. The bastion of the north had fallen, with the arrival of the harsh winter after lasting 2 seasons under siege. At the end of winter, the hordes of chaos finally flooded the streets. Fire and destruction swallowed the brave warriors and common citizens alike. Butchered bodies were piled up in every corner of the ruined city, and the raw powers of chaos that choked the wind fused flesh into stone, creating living walls and buildings that screamed and formed twisted faces in incomprehensible forms. The Imperial army stood silent on the hill looking over the city in flames. They could see the legendary Kolek towering above the city walls. He was the firstborn kin of Krakenrock the Black, the father of the dragon ogres. His giant body moved destructively with the blizzard in the darkness that followed him. The sun was hidden, as it always was when Kolek awoke from his sleep. Kolek was last seen on that day, when he followed the will of the dark gods and brought doom upon Prague. Prague had been decimated, and its fate represented a dire warning of the terrible things that awaited the rest of the world. Once the sorrowful news of Prague's destruction reached the ears afar, the dwarfs of Karak moved ahead to aid the Kislevites in the defense of their capital, for they knew this was neither a fight for a throne nor for riches. This was for the very survival of the world they knew, against the now undeniable raw powers of the dark gods. When Prague sank into complete darkness, the Chaos forces began to systematically move south, marching directly towards the capital of Kislev. The Imperial cavalry gave chase to the rear guard of the massive Chaos army, hunting them along the way. In a carefully prepared ambush, the Imperial cavalry attacked the Chaos units marching behind the main army of Asavar Kul. Driven with grief for their fallen brothers and sisters of Prague, the cavalry effectively destroyed the Chaos rear guard, with the Ever-Chosen not even noticing their attack. Asavar Kul's horde continued towards the city of Kislev, laying siege to the capital. Meanwhile, Magnus was leading his army to the capital of Kislev to resupply before marching to Prague. However, when the weary Imperial army arrived, they found the Chaos forces before the gates of the city. The Chaos host was made up of thousands upon thousands of warriors, dressed in animal skins and black armor. It was then that Magnus realized the fate of the old world would most likely be decided in the Battle of Kislev's Gate. Magnus recognized the situation and ordered an attack. There was no time to lose, as the capital was already under heavy siege. The giant Imperial army formed a battle line and charged against the foul creatures of the dark, bringing a fragile hope along for the tired Kislevites and dwarf warriors already defending the city with all they had. Asavar Kul did not expect such a massive force from the Empire to arrive so soon, and the Chaos army was surprised by the attack. Large regiments comprised of disciplined soldiers and dwarves were supported by the magic of Teclis and a few other mages that unleashed their powerful spells upon the dark host. The Imperial soldiers pierced deep into the enemy ranks. Just when the Chaos hordes began to buckle by this sudden assault, Asavar Kul rallied his greatest warriors and charged, using their greater numbers and unnatural strength to cut through the men of the Empire. Human blood was spilled with every swing of his massive weapon. The discipline and determination of the newly arrived army was just not enough against the massive number of Chaos warriors. As the battle progressed, Asavar Kul with his bodyguard and hundreds of warriors of Chaos and tribesmen began slowly encircling Magnus's army. Upon seeing the arrival of this relief force, around 300 dwarf warriors quickly organized a counterattack from the city gates and attempted to regroup with the Imperial army. Yet the crushing numbers of Chaos warriors and beasts of all names drove them back into the city. Only half of the dwarves made it back. Magnus's army was forced into a defensive position, and against the massive numbers of Chaos warriors, carnage ensued. No quarter was given in the swirling melee. From the city ramparts, archers poured piercing arrows into the backs of the ruinous powers. Nearby, dwarfs and Kislevites were stuck within the city walls and gates, fighting back the hordes, while Magnus's army was surrounded by the massed ranks of Chaos warriors and creatures. When all seemed lost, the winds whipping from the north brought the distant sounds of war cries and the neighing of horses to their ears. All turned to see what was heading towards them, like an avalanche waiting to fall from the mountain top. The cavalry forces sent to aid Praag were standing on the Hill of Heroes. The hooves stomped the earth, and the Imperial army spilled from the hill like a raging river heading towards the Ever-Chosen's army. As they clashed with the Chaos forces, the Kislevites and dwarves within the city opened the gates, and all poured out once again to unite with their allies. Hit from 3 different angles with maddened armies, the forces of Chaos started to disassemble and fall apart. Magnus faced Asavar Kul in single combat. The Ever-Chosen fought, enhanced by the powers of the Dark Gods, while Magnus was filled with Sigmar's strength and martial skill. The two mighty warriors battled for hours, but by nightfall, Asavar Kul had lost his head, and the Dark Gods had abandoned their army, left to be slaughtered. We will explore the Great War against Chaos more deeply in another video, but with steel, courage, and faith in Sigmar, that terrible war was won. The toll had been high, and the blood spilled during the conflict would forever taint the lands of Kislev. After the victory, the scattered survivors of the Chaos army were pushed back to the northern Chaos wastes, where they came from. The battle was won. Yet, mending the wounds, rebuilding a shattered country, and clearing the lands occupied by the leftovers of Chaos would take centuries. Magnus the Pious became a hero, and was crowned as the next emperor. The lesson taught by Sigmar was remembered. Men will only survive if they stand together. Since the Great War against Chaos, the ties between Kislev and the Empire have strengthened, and there is an increased mutual recognition and respect among their people. The harsh terrain and environment of Kislev make for vast but almost empty lands. The Kislevites have to travel great distances between settlements and cities. The less civilized north is inhabited by tribes of nomadic horsemen, experts in cavalry warfare and reputable marksmen who loose arrows at their enemies, forever staying out of reach. To the south of Kislev, more fertile grounds can be found, and that's where its cities are built. The current capital of Kislev changed many names and rulers throughout history. After its conquest by the Gospodars, Khan Queen Miska realized the value of its location in order to rebuild the city, renaming it Kislev. Sitting almost at the border with the Empire, cultural influences from their southern neighbors is blended in with the traditions dating back to Ungol tribes and the customs of the Gospodar. Behind the giant walls and towers armed with cannons and crossbows, lively and busy streets lead deeper into the bustling city. Upon entering the city gates, visitors can join in the rapid current of traders and shouting vendors in the main street, and eventually find themselves drinking in one of the many taverns in the city. Following after the boulevard, one can walk into the Garoyev Square and look at the iron statues of proud Tsars in awe. Many notable buildings and palaces, such as the High Temple of Ulrich, the Temple of Daj, and the Boka Palace, climb high in and around the square. Yet, the most astonishing of them all is the Palace of the Tsarina, the Ice Queen, Katarin the Great. Built with white stones, it rises from the ground as an impressive ice sculpture, affirming her majesty and strength. From there, Katarin rules with an iron grip over her land, and commands respect from her subjects and her allies. A powerful mage in her own right, a stubborn governor, and cold woman, the Ice Queen watches over Kislev. Initially built by the Ungols who inhabited the lands before the arrival of the Gospodars, Prague is the oldest city in Kislev. Frequent invasions and attacks led to the construction of giant outer walls with spikes, inner walls, and many traps, gaining the city the name Bastion of the North. After accepting the Gospodar rule, many Ungols returned to their city and made it their home once more. Although a part of Kislev and ruled by its Tsar, Prague is seen as an outsider city, with its needs mostly ignored by the capital. Without the help of the central ruling, the city steered its own economy, eventually becoming a trade hub. In prosperous times, it was the place one could find the best craftsmen and artisan goods of the region. The use of luxurious metals in their crafts, and the trade of exotic goods brought from far lands through Hell Pass, also added to its wealth. Soon, great buildings were established, such as the Great Opera House, the Academy of Music, and the Observatory, attracting many visitors. Prague's many misfortunes left the city crippled and the inhabitants scarred forever. Gaining the name the Cursed City, it has an evil reputation, for during the Great War against Chaos, the city was overrun with the servants of the ruinous powers, and twisted beyond recognition. Travelers tell tales in hushed tones of cries of agony that pierce the night, in faces that appear in the walls of buildings to consume the unwary with savage ferocity. Yet the people of Prague are of the most stubborn kind, who somehow find the will to defend and inhabit the decayed streets and buildings. Sitting at the mouth of River Linsk, Erengrad is the gate of Kislev, opening to the Sea of Claws. There was once a time when Erengrad was known as Norvard, under the rule of Ungols. After the Ungols were driven away from Prague by the Gospodars, they retreated to Norvard and made it their new capital city. The next Tsarina, Shoika, the daughter of Miska, was smart to see the importance in conquering the city, which would finally unite the nation as her mother envisioned. She eventually rode with her mighty riders to take the city and renamed it Erengrad. The natural harbor allowed Kislev to trade with other nations and explore the Sea of Claws. After its reconstruction, Erengrad prospered as a trading port, almost as busy and well-established as the trade city of Marienburg. Ships docked at the harbor from all over the Old World, bringing whale oil, gems, slaves, and other goods, ensuring a lively economy in the city. During the Great War against Chaos, Erengrad was ravaged once more. However, most of the bigger structures that once adorned the port were rapidly rebuilt after the war. This quick reconstruction was made possible by the refugees returning to the city and the materials brought in by the traders. Just as it was before the Great War, the new design of the city has three main areas. The harbor area is generally inhabited by the middle class. This was also the best protected region of Erengrad during the war. The lower city is the poor part of Erengrad, subjected to frequent floods from both the river Linsk and during the high tides. The high city is the wealthiest part of town, which was completely ruined during the war, but was rebuilt surprisingly fast with the use of imported building materials and recovered parts from the ruins. Highly skilled in horse riding and archery, Kislevites are natural-born warriors. Although their invaders mostly hold greater numbers, Kislevites adopted hit-and-run tactics, using their unmatched speed on horseback to attack. Their strategies in the battlefield and skills in warfare were frequently put to test both during many small-scale invasions by the raiders of the north and in the Great Wars, putting the whole nation in danger. Forces of Kislev were primarily organized in small squads, called rotas. During an attack, rotas joined together to form polks under the command of a gospodar noble. Depending on the greatness of the attack, different polks form an army and face the threat. During the Great War against Chaos, all the polks of the Kislevites had to come together to hold the armies back, until the joined forces of the Empire led by Magnus came to their aid. Considering their capabilities on horseback, the strongest part of any Kislevite army is formed by legions of their cavalry forces. Ursun, the war god, is considered Kislev's most revered god. Ursun was said to be the main god of the Gospodars when they still lived in their original homeland. Ungol horse archers are known to be one of the fastest flocks in the old world. Riders of this legion are recruited from the northern lands of Kislev, dominated by Ungol descendants. Although they lack the discipline of organized forces, using their strength and speed in archery, they adopted a technique of making circles around the enemy and wear them out by repeatedly attacking and retreating. During great invasions, winged lancers throughout the country unite to defend their homeland in the name of the Tsar. These heavily armored warriors bear the lance as their primary weapon, but also use swords after their initial attack. The name of the legion comes from the impressive and intimidating wings on the back of their armor. When a warrior is ought to prove his worth, he has to complete a task of hunting an eagle. He is then given minimal weaponry and 5 days' time in the wilderness on his own. Once he returns from his mission, the feathers of the eagle are used to decorate his armor. Griffin Legion is the most elite of the mounted soldiers, and are formed by the best of the Gospodar winged lancers. Their wings are adorned with the feathers of legendary bird lion griffins, showing their strength and pride. Although utterly loyal to the Tsar, and will always answer his or her call, they are independent warriors who work as mercenaries throughout the Empire as well. Kislevite infantry is mainly formed by Kossars, a legion fighting with axes and bows. In the very beginning, Kossars were an Ungol tribe who fought for the Gospodars as mercenaries in the battles against the other rebellious Ungol tribes. The modern legion is formed by both Ungol and Gospodar descendants. Upon joining the infantry, the previous crimes committed by the soldiers are forgiven. Perhaps this is the reason for their reputation as troublemakers. Yet they are famed for their efficiency and brutality in the battlefield. The elite part of the infantry is the Streltsy Legion, made of Erengrad Kossars. Their specialty lays in the use of black powder rifles, as implemented by Boyar Boydinov. After witnessing the crushing powers of the Imperial black powder in action, eager fighters travel to Erengrad to be trained as Streltsy, as this is the only place in Kislev where the use and training of handguns can be afforded. The Streltsy are a fanatically loyal legion, both to their homeland and to one another. One can notice their strong brotherhood, both in the battlefield and when they are off duty, as it is almost impossible to find a Streltsy on his own without his brothers. The stories of the bear cavalry of Kislevites, although dismissed by many, are still told by the common folk. Without a doubt, beliefs of such nature are sparked by the legend of the bear and the now long-gone Tsar Boris Boka, the father of Tsarina Katarin. He was a believer of the patron god Ursun, the god of bears and strength. To prove his worth, Boris walked into the forest to tame a wild bear and disappeared for weeks. When the restless search party finally found him deep in the forest, they could not believe the scene before their very eyes. Boris was lying still on the red snow, surrounded by a dozen dead wolves, and protected by an enormous bear, which did not let anyone come near the body. The next day, when Boris finally awoke, he told his men the story of how he challenged the mighty bear with his bare hands. Their fight lasted long hours before suddenly they were surrounded by a pack of hungry wolves. Boris stood his ground alongside the bear, united at the sight of a common enemy. Both of them fought ferociously until all the wolves fell dead with crushed skulls. The bear did not forget the help of this courageous human, and so he stood beside him when the Tsar fell unconscious until they were found. That was the day when an unlikely brotherhood was rooted. Boris was from then on a priest of the cult of Ursun, and given the name Boris Ursus. His bear brother, Erskine, followed him back to Kislev and never left his side, charging at the enemy in the wars to come with Boris on his back. During the long winter nights, the men of Kislev gather around their log cottages, remembering the glory of the Tsars of old and the might of the ice queens of bygone ages. They sing songs of war and dream of happier times, for their own age is filled with much strife. Kislevites are not only survivors of the frozen tundras and the chaos forces, but they are the stubborn masters of both the cold and warfare. Their witches have long practiced the mysterious and deadly ice magic, even in the old times when they roamed the eastern steppes. While their fellow clans learned to endure the ice and the cold, selected gospodars ruled the element. This unique and hard-to-control power, gifted to the strongest mages, allowed gospodars and later Kislevites to survive and thrive, even in the most hopeless situations. When Grimgor Ironhide, one of the deadliest black orcs who ever lived, attacked Kislev and slaughtered its armies, it was the ice magic of Tsarina Katarin that saved her people. A ruthless storm of ice and snow mercilessly swept Grimgor's hordes back to the mountains. With the leadership of their Ice Queen Katarin, Kislevites remain as the hardy people of the icy tundra of the north. They might seem grim, bitter, and even hostile to the southern children of the world. Yet, it is their traditions, strong brotherhood, and love for their lands that keep the dark forces at bay throughout the endless war against the encroaching chaos. Those who regard the Kislevites as being savage and uncivilized would do well to remember that it is the shedding of their young men's blood on the frozen borders of the north that keeps us safe in our beds. They deserve nothing less than our full respect. On this channel, we are putting together narrative Total War cinematic battles and Warhammer lore videos. A special thank you goes to our Patreon supporters who help us in the making of more content. You can also join Patreon and earn extra perks while supporting the videos to come. Find the link in the description below. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.